or something that touches every one of us: anger. Specifically, how to never get angry or bothered by anyone. Now, that might sound unrealistic, but it's not. Because what we're really talking about is understanding how the nervous system functions, how the mind interprets social interactions, and how we can create buffers, neurobiological and psychological, that allow us to remain in control. And let's start with the basics. Anger is not a moral failure. It's not a weakness. It's a signal. At a neural level, anger arises when the brain perceives a threat, often to ego, status, or sense of fairness. The amygdala, a region of the brain associated with emotional salience, becomes active. The sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system, is recruited. Heart rate increases. Breathing becomes shallow. Blood flow shifts. We prepare for conflict. That's the biology. But the good news is we are not slaves to our biology. We are observers and modulators of it. If your goal is to never be bothered by anyone, if you want to build a nervous system that's essentially unshakable, then the question isn't how to avoid difficult people. It's how to train your system to remain neutral or even compassionate in the face of them. So let's break that down. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. That space is the foundation of all emotional regulation. And for most people, that space is barely perceptible. Something happens, a comment, a tone of voice, a look, and the reaction is almost instantaneous. The words come out, the body tightens, the voice rises. It feels automatic, but it's not. It's practiced, it's rehearsed over years of repeated emotional responses that have become the default wiring in the nervous system. So if we want to never get angry or bothered, the first place to start is by training that space, lengthening the gap between what happens and what we do next. The science behind this is rooted in the way the brain processes threat. When someone says or does something that triggers us, the signal travels first through the limbic system, especially the amygdala. The amygdala's job is to rapidly assess whether a situation is safe or threatening. And it's fast, much faster than the prefrontal cortex, which is the rational decision-making part of the brain. So if the amygdala senses threat, it hijacks the system, it triggers the release of norepinephrine and cortisol, activates the sympathetic nervous system, and pushes the body toward fight or flight. But we can interrupt that process. We can install a moment of awareness between the trigger and the reaction. And the most accessible, powerful way to do that is through the breath, specifically through something called the physiological sigh. It's a pattern of breathing that consists of 2 quick inhales through the nose, followed by a long, extended exhale through the mouth. This is not a technique invented in a lab or in a meditation retreat. It's a natural behavior observed in humans and animals alike. You can see it when someone cries and then starts to calm down, or when a dog settles in after being excited. This pattern of breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system. It tells the body, you are not in danger. It slows the heart rate, increases heart rate variability, and brings the prefrontal cortex back online. And the beautiful part is that it only takes about 10 seconds. 1 or 2 physiological sighs, practiced deliberately, can stop the cascade of anger in its tracks. But this has to be trained. And like any form of training, consistency matters more than intensity. You don't wait until you're in the middle of a confrontation to practice this. You don't wait until the heat is rising and the fists are clenched and the words are forming. You train it when you're calm. You train it when nothing is wrong. That way, when the moment does arrive, and it always will, you've already built the circuitry. You're not trying to improvise calm. You're accessing it. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change in response to experience. And one of the most underappreciated aspects of neuroplasticity is that it's gated by attention and emotional intensity, which means that every time you get triggered, you're actually standing at a doorway. If you can redirect your attention in that moment toward the breath, toward awareness, toward stillness, you're carving a new groove in the brain. You're teaching your nervous system that it's safe to pause, safe to not react, safe to choose. This is not suppression. This is not about holding in anger or pretending not to feel things. Suppression builds tension in the body. It creates stress and fragmentation. What we're talking about is regulation. Regulation means acknowledging the emotion, but not being ruled by it. It means being able to feel the activation rising, tight chest, heat in the face, pressure in the head, and respond with a signal of safety. There's a kind of power that comes from knowing you don't have to react. You don't have to match someone's energy. You don't have to defend your ego. You can just pause breathe, and let the wave pass. And it does pass. That's one of the great truths of emotion. It's transient. Most anger, left alone, will dissolve in 90 seconds or less. It's only when we feed it through thought loops, through inner dialogue, through verbal escalation, that it grows into something unmanageable. So the pause is not passive, it's not weak, it's an active intervention. It's a practice of strength, and the more you practice it, the less reactive you become, not because you've numbed yourself, but because you've built capacity. The space between stimulus and response gets wider. You start to live in that space. And in that space, you're free. One of the most powerful shifts you can make in emotional regulation is learning to reframe how you see the people who trigger you. For most of us, when someone behaves rudely, dismissively, or with arrogance, we interpret that behavior as a direct challenge, a threat to our status, a disruption of fairness, an attack on who we are. And from the brain's perspective, that perceived threat triggers the same neural circuits that would fire if we were in physical danger. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational assessment, gets overridden by limbic activity. In particular, the amygdala interprets the social slight as a type of attack. Adrenaline and cortisol levels rise. The sympathetic nervous system prepares the body for conflict, even if the enemy is just someone rolling their eyes in a meeting. So the first step is recognizing what the brain is doing. It's reacting based on evolutionarily old mechanisms. In ancestral environments, social cohesion was essential for survival. Being excluded or disrespected could literally be a matter of life or death. Today, most of those situations are not life-threatening, but our biology hasn't changed much. What has to change is how we interpret the behavior of others. And that's where reframing comes in. Reframing is the cognitive act of choosing a different perspective. It doesn't mean denying what's happening. It means assigning a different meaning to it. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Instead of telling yourself, they're an inconsiderate person, you can tell yourself, they're in a hurry for a reason you don't understand. Maybe they're rushing to a hospital. Maybe they're simply not paying attention. Either way, you release the assumption that their behavior is a personal insult. That shift matters because it changes your emotional response. It interrupts the anger circuit and replaces it with curiosity or neutrality or even compassion. This isn't just a mental trick. It's a neurochemical shift. When you reframe the situation, you engage the prefrontal cortex, you activate executive function, which allows you to override emotional reflexes. The prefrontal cortex has strong inhibitory connections to the amygdala, so when it's engaged, the emotional intensity can dial down. This is why people who practice reframing regularly through cognitive behavioral tools or mindfulness-based approaches tend to be less reactive over time. They've literally changed their brain. Now let's take it further. What if you didn't just reframe the situation, but the person? What if, instead of labeling them as toxic or negative, you saw them as a training partner? The way someone training in a gym doesn't resent the weight they're lifting. They welcome it because they know that's how strength is built. In the same way, difficult people can be viewed as part of your psychological training. They provide resistance. They reveal your weak points. They give you the chance to practice staying regulated under pressure. And the moment you see it that way, something shifts internally. You no longer need the other person to change in order for you to feel peace. You no longer depend on others being agreeable for you to feel balanced. Instead, you begin to find a kind of internal sovereignty, a stable baseline, because your emotional state is now anchored in choice, not reaction. There's also something important to understand about emotional projection. Often the people who are the most aggressive, dismissive, or irritating are not doing so out of strength. They're doing it out of dysregulation. Their nervous systems are overwhelmed. Their sense of self is fragile. Their behavior is often a defense mechanism, an attempt to protect themselves from shame, fear, or insecurity. When you start to recognize this, not from a place of moral superiority, but from a place of clarity, your whole relationship to confrontation changes. You begin to see behavior for what it is, an expression of internal state, not a measure of your worth. And once you understand that, you begin to get strategic. You stop giving your energy to every comment, every glance, every provocation, not because you're avoiding conflict, but because you're conserving energy. You're optimizing. The same way you wouldn't chase down every barking dog on the street, You don't emotionally engage with every passing disruption. You choose your responses deliberately. That's not detachment, it's discipline. Emotional discipline means not letting someone else's dysregulation determine your state. It means you remain the regulator of your own system, regardless of external noise. The people who trigger us the most are often the ones we secretly give the most power to. And the moment you take that power back, not by dominating them, but by no longer needing anything from them, you become free. When you master reframing, you stop seeing the world as something that owes you emotional comfort and start seeing it as a place to sharpen your own presence, awareness, and control. When we talk about emotional immunity, what we're really discussing is the ability to endure stress without being overwhelmed by it. It's the capacity to face the emotional challenges life throws at us, whether that's a difficult person, an unforeseen setback, or even an existential crisis, and remain stable. This doesn't mean being impervious to all feelings or becoming a robot. It means being resilient enough to process those feelings without losing control or being swept away by them. Building emotional immunity is like training your immune system. You don't wait until you're sick to start working on your health. You don't wait until you're in a crisis to start strengthening your body's defenses. Likewise, you don't wait until you're triggered or upset to start training your emotional responses. You create a foundation of resilience before the storm hits, and you do that through consistent practices that reinforce the body's ability to stay grounded no matter what's happening around you. The most important piece of this foundation is understanding how the nervous system operates under stress. The autonomic nervous system has two main branches. The sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for the fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for rest, relaxation, and recovery. Both systems are crucial, but we are often caught in a cycle of overstimulation, where the sympathetic nervous system is chronically activated, especially in modern life, where stressors are constant and relentless. When we are chronically in a sympathetic state, we feel more reactive, anxious, and less able to handle emotional challenges. On the other hand, when we can activate the parasympathetic system intentionally, we can enter a state of calm and clarity. This is why practices like meditation, deep breathing, and even something as simple as walking in nature can have such a profound effect on our emotional resilience. These practices are not just ways to relax, they're tools for training the body's ability to switch into a state of calm when needed, even in the face of stress. One of the most powerful tools for creating emotional immunity is the vagus nerve, which is the longest cranial nerve in the body. The vagus nerve plays a key role in regulating the parasympathetic nervous system. It is also intimately connected to emotional regulation. When the vagus nerve is activated, it helps reduce heart rate, lower blood pressure, and promote feelings of safety. This is why techniques like deep breathing, cold exposure, or even chanting have such a strong impact. They stimulate the vagus nerve and help us switch from a state of stress to a state of calm. But emotional immunity isn't just about calming down when you're triggered. It's also about creating a state of baseline calm so that your nervous system is primed for emotional challenges before they arise. This is where practices like mindfulness come into play. When you practice mindfulness, you're training yourself to stay present, to observe your thoughts and feelings without getting attached to them. You're practicing the ability to notice when your emotional state is shifting, when irritation starts to rise, or when anxiety starts to creep in, and to choose a more measured response. It's not about forcing yourself to feel a certain way. It's about training your body and mind to be present and to respond from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. Sleep is another crucial component of building emotional immunity. When we are well rested, our prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, emotional regulation, and impulse control, functions more effectively. We are better able to manage our emotions, think clearly, and stay focused. On the flip side, lack of sleep impairs our ability to regulate our emotions. It heightens our stress response, makes us more impulsive, and increases our sensitivity to negative emotions. So building emotional immunity involves not just mental and emotional practices, but also taking care of the body. Adequate sleep, proper nutrition, and regular exercise all play a role in strengthening your emotional resilience. Another important aspect of emotional immunity is exposure. Just like with physical exercise, you have to challenge your emotional system in order to build strength. This doesn't mean putting yourself in abusive or toxic situations. It means intentionally seeking out experiences that make you slightly uncomfortable. This could be as simple as engaging in a difficult conversation, putting yourself in a social situation that feels awkward, or taking on a project that pushes you out of your comfort zone. The key is that you are voluntarily exposing yourself to stressors in a controlled way so that when bigger challenges arise, you are better prepared to face them. This doesn't happen overnight. Building emotional immunity is a slow, deliberate process. It's about consistently showing up for yourself in small ways. It's about giving your body and mind the tools they need to stay grounded, calm, and clear, no matter what life throws at you. And it's about cultivating a deep understanding that emotional regulation is not something you do only when you're triggered. It's something you practice every day in ways that are as subtle and as powerful as building muscle through strength training. Over time, this consistent effort creates a new baseline for your emotional state. You become more stable, more adaptable, and more resilient. And when you face situations that once would have caused you to react impulsively, you'll find that you are better able to choose a thoughtful, grounded response instead. Your emotional immune system will be stronger. You'll have greater capacity for patience, empathy, and clarity, and less of a tendency to get caught up in emotional turbulence. When we talk about empathy, it's often misunderstood as a sign of weakness or passivity. In reality, empathy is one of the most powerful tools for emotional regulation. And it's not something that comes from a place of inferiority or submission. Rather, it's a strategic response that allows you to break free from the cycle of anger and frustration. The truth is, when you feel yourself getting angry or bothered by someone, the impulse to react is often rooted in your own internal interpretation of their behavior. However, underneath that initial reaction is often something more profound, a deeper, quieter understanding of the other person's pain, fear, or unresolved emotional distress. When you start to shift your perspective and see others not as adversaries, but as individuals acting from their own complex psychological landscapes, you begin to disempower the triggers that once controlled you. Anger is a secondary emotion. It rarely arises from a vacuum. More often than not, it is a response to hurt or fear. When someone cuts you off in traffic, when a colleague speaks dismissively to you, or when a friend forgets your birthday, the initial emotion that arises isn't necessarily anger. It's usually something deeper, like hurt, disappointment, or fear of rejection. Our first response is often to mask that vulnerability with a layer of anger because anger feels more powerful, more assertive. It gives us a sense of control, as if we can protect ourselves from further harm by expressing it. But here's the truth. Anger may momentarily mask the vulnerability, but it never resolves it. It only perpetuates the cycle of emotional disturbance. This is where empathy comes in. When you begin to view the source of your anger through the lens of empathy, you start to recognize that most people are acting out of their own internal struggles, fears, and unresolved pain. When a colleague snaps at you, it might not be about you at all. It might be about the stress they're under, the insecurity they feel about their position, or the unresolved conflict they're carrying. When someone cuts you off in traffic, they may be responding to an internal anxiety or a rush they can't control. The aggression they direct outward is often a reflection of their inner turmoil, not an assessment of your worth or character. Recognizing this doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it allows you to see the situation in a more nuanced way. This shift in perception is liberating. It gives you the ability to respond from a place of wisdom rather than emotional reactivity. You no longer feel the need to defend yourself because you understand that their behavior is not a direct attack on your worth. It's a reflection of their own inner state. And when you stop internalizing the actions of others as personal attacks, you stop giving them the power to dictate your emotional response. Instead, you are in control. Empathy doesn't mean condoning hurtful behavior. It means understanding that hurt people hurt people. When you practice empathy, you can start to see that their behavior is often an outward manifestation of their own unresolved wounds. By extending empathy, you neutralize the emotional charge of the situation. You allow yourself to disengage from the cycle of escalation. You stop fueling the fire of their anger by meeting it with your own. This shift allows you to act from a place of inner peace rather than being swept away by the emotional currents around you. This doesn't mean suppressing your emotions or pretending you're not hurt by someone's actions. It means recognizing the emotion for what it is,